Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. John Mitchell, a millionaire businessman, lived atop a Manhattan skyscraper in a glass-enclosed penthouse that offered spectacular views of the city that never sleeps. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, one could see the lights of Times Square dancing in the night, yellow taxis scuttling by like hurried ants, and skyscrapers twinkling like clockwork stars. This apartment was a symbol of success, a sanctuary of modern luxury. Fine wood, Italian marble, contemporary artwork, every detail had been carefully chosen by renowned architects. To the world, John Mitchell was the embodiment of the American dream, a self-made man who had started from nothing and now led a financial empire. He was often seen in the pages of business magazines, always smiling, always impeccable. He had a beautiful house in the Hamptons, classic cars, an impeccable reputation, and most importantly, he had Emily, his 10-year-old daughter, a small light in his life, a lively, curious child with golden hair and a crystal-clear laugh. But everything had collapsed 6 months earlier. A wet road, a drunk driver, a scream, then silence. Emily, his only child, his entire world, had been killed instantly. John had been driving. He hadn't been responsible. The police had said so. But guilt didn't care about official reports. It had settled inside him like a slow-moving poison. Since that day, John had been a shell of his former self. The world could keep turning. He had remained frozen in that night. He had canceled all his social gatherings, fired his household staff, turned off the lights in the penthouse. He wandered alone, often without eating, staring at the photos of Emily lined up on the piano, or sitting on his bed, still breathing in the scent of his favorite blanket. He wasn't crying. He couldn't anymore. His face remained expressionless, but his soul was bleeding. One cold, gray winter evening, as the city was buried under a thin layer of snow, John stepped out for a rare meeting with his partners. He had said almost nothing during the meeting. The numbers? The markets? Quarterly performance? It seemed distant, absurd. He left the conference room without saying goodbye, his expression closed. He took a taxi home. He sat in the back, hands clasped, staring blankly as the city lights streamed silently past the window. The vehicle slowed to a stoplight, just across from Riverside Park. He automatically turned his head outside, for no particular reason. And that's where he saw her. A figure, huddled on a bench, barely visible under a makeshift blanket. A young woman, wrapped in an old, ragged coat, her hair matted, her cheeks hollow from cold and hunger. She barely moved, but her eyes shone in the shadows like two obsidian shards. They were large, intense, and stared at John with an almost unreal concentration. Not with hatred, nor with jealousy, but with a kind of disarming clarity. As if she saw him. Really, as if she saw what no one else could or would see in him. He was struck by a sudden unease. He looked away, shook his head, and briefly closed his eyelids. When he opened them again, she was still there. Motionless. Present. Inexplicably present. Her name was Sarah. She was 27, but the streets made her look 10 years older. The weather, hunger, fear, and the stares of others had sculpted her face with the harshness of concrete. For 2 years, she had survived in the bowels of New York, between the corners of abandoned buildings, the warm subway entrances, the soup kitchens, and the public benches that became, every night, her only home. She knew the city by its shadows, its silences, and its drafts. She knew the faces that turn away, the hands that close, the insults that fall like rain. But that evening, a strange shiver ran down her spine, a foreboding, like an invisible hand on her shoulder. She had seen this man, elegant, sitting in a black taxi, his face pale and frozen like a statue. His gaze wasn't like the other rich men who passed her by with disdain or indifference. No, his gaze was elsewhere. Broken, empty. She watched him for a few seconds, without moving, then stood up slowly, ignoring the cold biting at her bare feet in her holey sneakers. Something inside her was growing, an irrepressible, inexplicable impulse. She didn't know where this courage came from. She had no plan, just one certainty. She had to talk to him. As the light turned green and the taxi slowly pulled away, Sarah clumsily ran across the street, cars honking around her, and approached the back door. She tapped lightly against the glass with her fingertips. John turned his head, surprised, and their eyes finally met, without intermediary. She had been voiceless for days. But then, a new strength burst forth from her chest, and she spoke in a voice that was firm, clear, yet gentle. "Sir, may I wake your dead daughter?" The world seemed to stop. John's eyes widened, frozen. He remained motionless for a few seconds, his lips parted, as if time had frozen around this absurd, cruel, perhaps even insane question. And yet, something inside him vibrated, like a string stretched too long. He slowly lowered the window. The cold seeped into the car. Sarah, trembling but upright, stared at him with disturbing intensity. "What did you just say?" he whispered. "I know what it's like to lose someone, to think there's nothing left." Her voice trembled, but she continued. "Sometimes it's not the dead person you have to wake, sir. It's the one who remains." John felt a shiver run down his spine. "You're suffering. You've locked yourself in a tomb you built with your pain. But sometimes all it takes is a voice, a look, an unexpected question to break the night." He opened his mouth to reply, but no words came out. His throat was tight. He slowly closed the window, but not out of contempt. More like a man who senses the dam is about to burst. The taxi continued on its way, and he turned one last time to look at this young woman, frozen in the snow, her arms crossed over her chest, her gaze fixed on his. That night, he didn't sleep. He wandered through the icy silence of his penthouse, his bare feet on the cold wooden floor, unable to think of anything other than this otherworldly sentence. "Can I wake your dead daughter?" He knew nothing about her. Not her name, not her story, not what exactly she had meant. But those words swirled around in his head like a strange, almost sacred melody. And for the first time in months, he felt something other than emptiness. A flaw, a thrill, a spark. The next morning, John Mitchell awoke with a new weight in his chest. Not the weight of grief. He'd grown accustomed to it, like a dull ache that becomes a constant background noise, but a different kind of tension. A keen, almost painful curiosity. A necessity. He left his building without warning his driver, put on a black coat over his suit, and took a taxi without giving any details. He simply asked, "Riverside Park, where the benches face 86th. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror, surprised to see such a well-dressed man wanting to walk to this part of the park in the middle of winter. But he didn't press the issue. When John arrived, the sky was gray, almost uniform, and the snow was slowly melting into dirty puddles at the foot of the bare trees. The wind was icy, biting his cheeks and lifting the hems of his coat. And there she was, Sarah, curled up on the same bench, wrapped in a worn coat that no longer seemed to protect her. Her fingers protruded from holey mittens, her hair was tied back clumsily. But it wasn't her appearance that struck John, it was the light in her eyes. A strange, almost unreal clarity, despite the fatigue, despite the life she had led. He approached slowly, like a man entering a sanctuary. She saw him coming, but didn't move. She didn't seem surprised or afraid. She simply looked at him, as if waiting for him. John stopped a few steps away. He hesitated, then sat down at the end of the bench, keeping a respectful distance. The cold bit at his legs through his suit, but he paid it no attention. After a long silence, he whispered, "Why did you say that last night?" Sarah slowly turned her head toward him. Her eyes weren't shifty. They were calm, grounded. "Because I saw you, sir. Not your suit. Not your car. Not your silence. I saw you, and I saw emptiness. The kind of emptiness you can't fake." She shrugged softly, her lips pressed together as if she were hesitant to go any further, then added, "I lost my brother when I was 15. He was my refuge, my only support. One night, he went out to get milk, and he never came back. Some guy shot him for $10 and a watch. My mother went under. My father left, and I ended up here." She paused. The wind blew a little harder, and she pulled her blanket closer around her knees. "The world has no mercy for those who fall. It trampled me, ignored me, sullied me. But I understood, over time, that if I wanted to survive without becoming as cold as this city, I had to forgive. Not forget, but free myself." She turned her gaze back to John. "Pain confines. Hope liberates. And sometimes, simply saying the odd thing to a man in a taxi can sow a seed." John felt a lump in his throat. His hands were shaking. He'd spent 6 months locked away in his ivory tower, convincing himself that no one could understand. And yet, this woman, this stranger, had just put into words what he felt with disconcerting precision. He took a deep breath. My daughter's name was Emily. She was 10 years old. She loved birds. She drew them everywhere. The day she died, I was driving. We were going to her music class. He leaned forward slightly, his face tightening. It wasn't my fault. Everyone told me so, but I can't bring myself to say it. I braked too late. I shouted his name. I held his hand, still warm, and I knew it was over before the ambulances even arrived. Her voice broke. Sarah said nothing. She just placed her cold hand on John's, wordless, judgmentless. That simple touch was enough to break the dams. John Plura, not the furtive tears of nights past, not the silent sobs between memories. He wept like a man who has finally laid down a burden too heavy to bear alone. And Sarah stood there, motionless, like a stone in the storm, offering her presence as a refuge. As the weeks passed, a strange routine developed between John and Sarah. Every Tuesday and Friday, he returned to the park, sometimes with a thermos of hot coffee, sometimes with a bag containing a coat, a scarf, or simply a clean blanket. He sat next to her without speaking right away. The silence between them had become a space of peace, not awkwardness. Little by little, their exchanges thickened. They talked about everything and nothing. The rain, pigeons, childhood memories, the injustices of the world, forgotten dreams. John had never met anyone like her. Sarah, though damaged by life, maintained a disarming lucidity. She expected nothing from him. She sought neither favor nor pity. She offered only her presence, raw, true, with a rare honesty. One cold January day, John hesitated for a long time, then said to him, "You know, I haven't invited anyone over to my house in months. Would you like to come? Just get something to eat. Talk somewhere warm." Sarah stared at him in surprise, then slowly nodded. "If you're sure. I don't want to embarrass you." "You don't bother me, Sarah. You remind me that I'm alive." Sarah's arrival at the penthouse drew incredulous looks. The housekeeper, Helen, a rigid and loyal woman who had held the position for 20 years, gave her a puzzled look, then looked at John with concern. "Mr. Mitchell, this young woman, is your guest?" "Yes, Helen. Her name is Sarah, and she's here at my request." Helen nodded without question, but in the kitchen, the employees whispered, "A homeless person? In the Mitchell apartment?" They'd never seen anything like it. And yet, Sarah settled into the living room as if she'd always belonged there. Not with arrogance, but with the humility that makes people discreet and essential. She observed every detail of the penthouse, not to judge, but as someone rediscovering what home means. They shared a simple meal, pumpkin soup, fresh bread, and cheese. Sarah ate slowly, without overindulgence, with gratitude. Then, looking at the photos of Emily on the shelves, she said softly, "You should write him a letter. Tell him what you never dared to say." John frowned. "To whom?" "To Emily. Write to her as if she could read the stars. It won't bring her back, but it might bring you back." That night, John picked up a notebook he hadn't touched since the funeral, and he wrote a long, painful, heartbreaking letter. He told her about his love, his guilt, her absence. He cried for hours. Then he fell asleep, for the first time in 6 months, without nightmares. Weeks turned into months. Sarah now came regularly. She helped with the foundation John funded in her name. Together, they decided to create a structure, a place where the homeless could not only sleep and eat, but also talk, cry, write, and exist. They called it Emily's House, in memory of the little girl who had been John's light, and, in a way, the flame that had awakened Sarah, too. The beginnings were difficult. Some investors refused to support a project co-led by a formerly homeless woman. But John persevered. So did Sarah. She spoke at conferences and gave testimony on television. She didn't play the victim. She spoke with disarming sincerity, and little by little, hearts began to listen. A year later, the Mitchell-Sarah Foundation was helping hundreds of people. Mothers in distress, forgotten veterans, young people thrown out by their families, fathers broken by life. Some were learning to read again. Others were regaining their dignity. John was alive again. He laughed. He loved. He was committed. He spoke of Emily with tenderness, no longer with shame. Sarah, on the other hand, had found a place in the world again. She was taking training courses, working at the foundation, counseling those who no longer had a voice. At the Foundation's annual gala, John took the stage in front of a packed house. He wore a black suit, his face calm, his gaze fixed. A year ago, I was a dead man on borrowed time. I had lost everything. And it was a stranger, a homeless woman, who woke me up. She spoke to me when no one else dared. She reached out to me from the street while I was locked in my golden pain. He paused. Sarah was watching him from the front row, her eyes shining. She showed me that even in the darkest night, a light can shine. A light you don't expect, that comes from below, from where you never look. The audience remained silent, shocked. Then Sarah took the stage in turn, dressed soberly but with dignity. She looked around the room, then simply whispered, "Sometimes it's those you think are dead who can teach you the greatest life lesson." Thunderous applause erupted. But it wasn't a social ovation. It was an echo of touched souls. John and Sarah remained connected forever. Their bond was neither romantic nor commercial. It was deeper than all that. It was human, proof that compassion can penetrate the thickest walls, proof that a simple glance can rewrite a destiny.